Good morning, welcome to our homestead. So you've made the decision to move out of the city and to follow your dreams of living on a country homestead. I'm excited for you, and there are 15 things you must know when looking for homestead property. I believe that by paying careful attention to all of these 15 points is going to help you find a property that's going to fully provide for your family. Now let's talk about what those are. Now this list is not going to be in order because some people prioritize certain things more than other things, and I might prioritize things a little bit different than you. However, there are certain things like water availability that you and I know are extremely important. Since I just mentioned water, let's start with that. So what I have behind me is called a dry creek, and you cannot rely on this to have any water in it because if there is no rain, this is not seeing any moisture at all. You want to look for a spring, a running river, a big lake, or a decent sized pond to have a good source of water on your property. And then obviously you can drill a well. Now wells can be incredibly expensive to drill if there is no water currently on the property, but you need to do your due diligence. My brother looked at property up in Wyoming and he had to do a drill to figure out if he could source water on a very nice piece of property in the mountains. Unfortunately, they did not find any quality water at all. He had to pay for that, but he didn't buy the property. So if you can find a property with a well already on it, that's very important. I'll tell you that our depths around this part of East Texas are about 400 feet for quality water, and that is the current rate on that, I know because somebody on our road just tried to drill a well, is $35,000. And if you do not hit water, you're out the $35,000. Now you absolutely can do rainwater reclamation, but depending on where you are going to have to size those rain tanks for periods of drought. For us, we put in 5,000 gallons of rain collection off of our barn, and that will just serve for the garden and the irrigation for that, the fruit trees, the greenhouse, and for our animals. But we had a period of time this summer where it did not rain for 2 months. So those tanks would have been bled dry a long time before those 2 months were over. If you're conservative, the average household of 4 people will use around 3,000 gallons of water per month. Now you can certainly use less, but think about irrigation. When it's not raining outside and you're trying to grow food for your family, it takes a lot of water. Besides physical attributes like water, something you want to do ahead of time before you even start looking for your property is to think about what you want to do with the property. Do you want to straight up farm it? Do you want to run livestock? Do you want to use it as a maple syrup farm? That's all up to you, but you really need to get that sorted out ahead of time and then look for a property that's appropriate for what you want to do. Now, of course, I understand that budget is going to be the biggest determining factor in that, but I don't want you to paint yourself into a corner if you can afford it. So the appropriate size of homestead property is different for everyone, but we wrote an article on our blog a few years ago about the perfect size piece of land for a homestead for 4 people. And that was right around 2 acres, a little over 2 acres. And that will give you enough property to grow food for your family year-round. However, when you buy a smaller property like that, more than likely you're going to have neighbors extremely close to you. Now, neighbors can be an asset. I've talked about that before. But if there are too many neighbors and you're the only one growing food, you can kind of figure out what's going to happen. And remember this, priorities change. Things change about what you will do on your property. And you may find that what you calculated initially is just not enough. So it's always better to get more land to be able to expand if you need to. So the third thing you need to look out for are homeowners associations or deed restrictions. Now you're thinking, well, way out in the countryside here, that can't happen. And that's incorrect. It can. I know someone not too far away that sold a 100-acre parcel into 10 roughly 10-acre parcels. And they put deed restrictions on it. So no livestock of a certain size and certain items like that. You want to totally avoid things like that because you want to be able to do on your property what you need to do to provide for your family and to survive. Sometimes out in the countryside, they'll use the word covenant, and I want you to look out for that and avoid those at all costs. Now, the next few things are similar, and this is when you're looking for that piece of property. Is it accessible? Do you need to drive over the top of a mountain to get to it? Do you need to get an easement from somebody else to try to even get back to your property? Is it landlocked in any way? Is there a big peat bog or a really muddy area that you would need to spend money building a road through to get to your property? I would avoid those also. Along with that, do you own the mineral rights to your property? Here in Texas, most people do not sell their land with the mineral rights attached, and those are separate and usually are more expensive than the land itself. Now, something that your realtor will have to find out, and it's going to be easy for them to find out, is if there were any environmental issues with your property. Were there any oil spills of any sort? Were there any chemical spills in the area? Anything like that. Additionally, are there any rail lines in your area? There are a certain amount of accidents every year on rail lines, derailments. Some of those sometimes carry chemicals and oil and things like that. So that's something you really need to be aware of. The next one kind of goes along with that, and that is property orientation. So are you looking at a piece of property that is on a north-facing slope on a mountain? That's probably not the best property to buy because you aren't going to get any sun to grow anything or to produce power if you want to do solar. I would honestly steer clear of anything like that. This property has a gentle slope down to our dry creek, but I know some properties in the area that had to be terraced because the slope was just a little bit too much. Now keep in mind with a lot of these things like your property orientation, you can do some things to overcome that, but do you want to put in that extra work, time, and money to overcome those things instead of looking for a property that's more suitable at the beginning of your search? All right, let's talk about the next one, your soil. If you want to grow food for your family, you need to find a property with good soil. Now, you can absolutely truck in good soil, but it's going to cost you. This is what they call topsoil here in East Texas. It's a red clay, heavy, sandy loam, and it does not grow much very well except for peanuts and sweet potatoes. Now, I do have places on my property where this harder red clay based soil is not close to the top. I have about 18 inches, maybe 12 inches of what's called just a sandy loam, and that stuff, when it dries out, is almost like beach sand. So when you are looking for your property, do your best. Some places are going to be rocky. Some places are going to be stuff like this. Some places are going to be like Michigan, where I grew up, in that beautiful, rich, fertile soil that's up there. You have to do your best in looking for it, but let this be a factor in the property you buy. Right behind me is our dry creek. In the summertime, it does not have anything in it, but in the spring, in East Texas, we have a lot of rain. I call it the monsoon season. It's the rainiest time of the year, and sometimes this fills up so much that it will flood up to about where I'm standing. There's a solid slope from the dry creek on that side to the back of the house, and the water never gets up that way. But in this direction, if you were thinking about building, this obviously wouldn't be the place to build. What you need to do is go look at the FEMA flood maps. They're very comprehensive, though the scale that they're at is a little bit larger, but you can tell where those 500-year and the 1,000-year floodplains are. Those are incredibly important. You do not want to put any buildings anywhere near a floodplain. The next one is timber. Are you going to be heating your home with wood? If you are, you need to buy a piece of property that's going to provide for you, where you don't have to go searching out wood and pay for it somewhere else. You need a piece of property that will provide you enough to heat your home in the winter per your location and environment. Down here in East Texas, it really doesn't get too cold for too long. We'll be in the 20s for maybe just a few weeks. But we still like to heat with wood during that period of time because it takes the burden off of our solar system. I'd say a good rule of thumb for your property is 50% wooded and 50% open space. And you're going to need that open space if you want to grow staple crops for your family. Say it's wheat or corn or beans and things like that. And you're also going to need that open space if you are going to put up something like solar. And let's talk about that next. Here we are underneath of our solar array that I DIY'd almost 2 years ago. If you haven't seen those videos, you can go check them all out by clicking on the link at the top of the screen. So it's all about where you want to get your power from. If you want to get it from the grid, is it available in your area? If you're high up on a mountain and there's no grid power that's going up there, this is probably your best bet. Although, depending on your environment, you can do a hydro system or you can do wind, like my brother lives up in Wyoming. And it is extremely windy up there all the time. And their solar hours per day are a lot less. So it would make sense for him to use more wind than solar. That's just an example of where he is, and all of you will have to determine what's best for you in your area. So behind me is our modest little home, and we actually shifted gears to originally looking for land, and we found this home and property which were already set up. That's going to be a decision you're going to have to make for yourself, whether you want to build or find something like this. My church has some really old writings from about 150 years ago telling people when they leave the city to move to the country to look for what's called a blueprint property. Something that might have fruit trees already and structures in place where you can just move in and get going on your country lifestyle. Does the property you were looking at have a barn already there, or a chicken coop, or a stable, or a well house? Those are all incredible assets to have that you don't have to spend time and money building once you get to your homestead. If you can find something like that, do it. Right behind me is something that I didn't think about early on, and when we were pricing out building a house and buying a larger piece of property, it quickly came into the calculations. And that is fencing. Fencing is incredibly important for your property. It does several different things. It keeps out predators, it keeps your livestock in, it keeps your kids in, and it keeps those predators away from your kids. And that was actually the most important factor for me. It's because I had little kids when we got here, and I didn't want them just wandering. Now, I keep a good eye on my kids, but having a fence is that added extra security that I think every parent wants. And the last one is a deterrent for trespassers. So yeah, anybody can hop over that fence really easy, but is it a deterrent because my neighbor down the street doesn't have any fencing at all? I think it is one of the most undervalued things when looking for a piece of property. And the huge blessing for us is this is cattle panel all the way around our entire 8 acres. That is much more expensive than woven wire or even obviously welded wire. This cattle panel is incredibly strong, and it's not going to rust out really quick. It's not going to fold under the weight of little branches that hit it. It is a great asset to us. Okay, here's the next one. Distance to a city or town that has things that you may need. If you're a building, you can't be so remote that it takes so much money to get the materials out to where you are, or even the labor, if you're not doing it yourself, of course, out to where you are. So don't stick yourself so far out that you have no support. And if you run out of food and you can't, or you have a bad growing season, you're going to need to obtain food somewhere. If it's 60 or 70 miles to the closest town with a grocery store and your old gas in your vehicle isn't cutting it anymore and not making your vehicle start, then you got a problem. And there's another reason to not be too far. And there's an old teaching in my church, not only to get out of the cities and move to the country, but to also not be so far away from the city where you can't go in to minister to people who need your help. And think of Elijah. He went into the city where Ahab was, and he brought out people to teach and to help out to his country property. And he also went in to warn Ahab, and then he got back out again. But he wasn't so far away that he couldn't do those things. And we shouldn't be either. The point of country living is to work on our character and to provide for our families. But it's not to forget about those who are in need, who mostly congregate in the city. Think about this too. If the city you are near, say it's Dallas, is so massive and some calamity happens in that city and people are trying to flee out of that city, are you on a corridor that really directs them right past your property? I'd highly recommend that you stay away from those human corridors that come straight out of the big cities. Okay, here's the last one. Where does God want you to be? Now I know not everybody watching this video is a Christian, but that's where my perspective is coming from. Have you prayed about it? Have you asked God, Lord, where am I to be? If it's completely all the way across the country and that's what He tells you to do, then do it. And just to wrap up, y'all, there is no perfect property. But I say that you need to move with urgency. So start looking now and look at a lot of different places that you could go. Keep in mind everything I talked about today when looking for your country property. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them for me in the comments section below. Now go check out this video right here where I talk about how you can do anything you put your mind to on your homestead. Have a beautiful, blessed day. We'll see you next time.